So hello everyone, I'm Anu Lingappa, a law student in Ashoka's Social Entrepreneurship and Legal Transformation Internship. During this past summer, our CELT cohort has had the incredible opportunity to reach out and have conversations with Ashoka Fellows who are attorneys doing change-making work within the legal space. This conversation is the latest installment of that series, and I'm thrilled to welcome Priti Krishtel, the co-founder for Initiative for Medicine's Access and Knowledge, which is also called I-MAK. I-MAK is a health equity and advocacy organization that litigates drug patents in order to increase the affordability of medicines. I-MAK's legal work and research operates in 49 countries on 33 therapies for a range of diseases, including HIV, hepatitis C, tuberculosis, diabetes, and cancer. Worldwide, for HIV treatments alone, I-MAK has helped government health programs save more than $2 billion in the past 12 years. I have some questions prepared, but I also want to open it up for the other CELT interns. Feel free to raise your hand if you have questions or comments to contribute. So my first question is, how is the patent system today different from what the founders envisioned? And I'm curious, as someone who's studied patent law, where in class the patent system is billed as being this great way to promote and incentivize innovation, and the other side of the story, which is how the patent system allows for a huge amount of needless suffering, it's not covered. So I would like your thoughts on that.
Okay. So the patent system, as it was originally envisioned here in the United States, we weren't the first, but when we brought our patent system here into being, it was around 1790, and the idea was that we wanted to motivate inventors and reward them with a time-limited monopoly. And the idea was then we would advance progress. Our Constitution actually talks about this idea of promoting progress in the arts and the sciences, and that society would flourish. I think where we are today, if you look back to the last 40 years of economic policy in the US, the patent system really made a shift. And that was because we brought in a lot of laws. We developed our patent law. We brought in other laws, and it was part of a larger body of economic thinking, but basically what happened was all of those new laws started to get gamed. And so today, rather than getting the 14 years of a time-limited monopoly or the patent that the founding fathers had envisioned, or even the 20 years that the law actually allows for, today we're seeing hundreds of patents being filed even on a single medicine. And so what's happening is that monopoly period is growing from 20 years to almost 40. And what we're seeing is happening for pharmaceutical products in particular is at the very end, when they feel like they're about to lose that patent, in the last 5 to 7 years, we're seeing the curve look like this, or in other words, they start to hike drug prices up because they know soon competitors are going to enter the market, their monopoly is going to end, prices are going to come down. And so I think it's mostly, if I was to say, how is the patent system different today, it's that it's being gamed and it's being used for purposes for which it wasn't intended. And there's a real need for government here in the US, but also worldwide, to start to bring it back to that original purpose.
So my next question is, how have you been able to use impact litigation to address this problem and increase access to medicine, both domestically and internationally?
So in the early 2000s, I was living in India, and I was a human rights lawyer working with communities living below the poverty line who couldn't afford their medicines. And I met my co-founder, his name is Tahir Amin at that time. And Tahir was an intellectual property lawyer from the UK who had worked on the other side, working for big corporations and law firms to defend patent rights. So he was able to show me that what corporations do when they are suing each other on patents is they basically use litigation, or they file cases at the patent office to say that they think a patent shouldn't be granted. And he suggested that for our clients, maybe we could start to use that as a tool. And so I was working at an NGO at a time. He was working for a think tank, and we teamed up. And we also started working with some pharmaceutical scientists who had come over from the pharma industry side who wanted to be part of it. And we started to file these cases basically to say that while patents are important for inventions, or when you first invent a medicine, what was happening for HIV, for example, is that more and more and more patents were being filed on the same medicine. So we started to intervene either in court or at patent offices to say, patents have to meet 3 criteria to be granted. They have to be new or novel, they have to be actually inventive, and they have to show utility or usefulness. And we would go in and file cases with scientific evidence to show that they weren't new or inventive. And usually we focused on that inventive piece because a lot of these medicines were already in the public domain, where the science or technology or practices used to, for example, one of our cases was about an HIV medicine where they turned it into a pediatric syrup. And we said, well, the industry has known for a long time that you turn these medicines into syrups. They don't need another patent for that. There are other exclusivity rights you can get for that. So it seems silly to give them more time on the market without competition. And so we started to file those cases in the early to mid 2000s. On our first 3 cases, we won. We were able to save health systems $1 billion and put millions of people on treatment. And then we started teaming up with patients and community organizers and lawyers across the world, like from Brazil and Argentina, from Thailand, from Ukraine, from Morocco, Indonesia, and all of those groups started to file patent challenges as well. And then we started to see savings of another $1 billion. And then more people started to enter the fight in more countries on hepatitis C, not just HIV. And those drugs were even more expensive, and the patents were being used to block access even more. And there, our cases are estimated. We're still waiting to see if people are put on treatment, but they're saying that that's going to open the market for up to $50 billion on just one medicine. And so we started to see the power of impact litigation very early on. And today the challenge is, of course, different. Today the challenge is we can't keep going drug by drug, patent by patent, country by country for litigation. It's not sustainable. We need systemic change, especially in the middle of a pandemic. So we're sort of shifting course to expand beyond litigation now to really think about public education and advocacy to actually change the structures themselves.
So a follow-up question to that, since the other attendees were all law students. So what skills do you think young lawyers would need in order to do impact work? And in particular, I'm curious about impact work that leverages law against STEM fields, which few people in law, I think, have science backgrounds going into it. And so it might be intimidating to take that on.
You know, looking back now, I really feel like I did myself a service in law school by taking a really broad range of coursework. I studied in law school, you know, the courses I did the best at actually were like corporations and tax law classes, you know, and then I took environmental law and FDA regulation of pharmaceuticals. I did a lot of different things, domestic violence clinic. And in the end, I ended up here, but I'm glad I did that because it gave me a deeper understanding and a broader understanding of the world. You know, I can follow climate change discussions now. I understand what, you know, kind of more business side conversations are. And I think that has enabled me to be a more maybe well-rounded human on the planet. I don't know what law school actually did, honestly, beyond encouraging me to think critically. I don't think the skills I got to understand how the science and law interact, I picked all that up in my career. I think law school just enabled me to learn how to think critically. It gave me tools, for example, the one you all know so well, which is always be able to argue the other side and really stand in the other side's shoes and think about what the best arguments are there. I have found that to really serve me in my advocacy. And make me a better advocate because I can do that.
Following from there, I was wondering, do you think in hindsight were your most valuable experiences in law school that helped you get to where you are now?
One stands out for me. I had a clinic my third year in law school, actually two. One is that I studied abroad. And I think that was very important for me personally. I don't know about all of you, but I had grown up in the States. And while I have family from India and I spent time in India, my worldview was very shaped by the American education system. And so I studied abroad. I lived in Australia for 6 months and did coursework there. And that was where actually I took my first class on the World Trade Organization, which covered a little bit of intellectual property and access to medicines, and gave me a much more global view, sitting in other countries' shoes to think about these multilateral systems, how they work, what the politics are. I didn't know before that, about the Pacific Islands and the relationship to New Zealand and Australia, or who their trading partners were. I don't think in law school here, I would have actually learned that. So that was extremely valuable. And then I did a clinic, a domestic violence clinic that was interdisciplinary. And they had us in a clinic with social workers. And we had to do this exercise where we interviewed a woman who came in to share her case. And we had to do intake, and they videotaped us. And it was really astonishing, I think, as 3Ls to watch those videos and see how cold we were in interacting with clients. Like, I think of myself as a warm person. I had come from a domestic violence counseling background before law school. And then I watched that video of myself, and I realized that law had trained me to actually be professional in a way that today I think we would understand comes from constructs, of patriarchy and white supremacy and all these other things that we are taught that lawyers have to be a certain way. And when we engage with other human beings, we have to have distance from them. That warmth and empathy perhaps are not professional in a legal context. And I don't think that's taught in words. I think it's subconscious through our legal training, how that evolves. And I was really surprised watching that video. And then I got to watch how the social workers did intake. And it was really eye-opening for me how I actually went into the private sector right after law school, but I committed to myself that even as I entered firm life and interacted with my clients, I wanted to show up in a different way than I did on that video.
So I have a question going back to your earlier answer when you talked about how you had gotten some scientists on board to help you provide evidence for your cases. So I'm just curious about like your strategy for engaging scientists to think about this, because like my background, I worked as a scientist in a drug discovery lab for several years, and part of why I switched to wanting to do law school was like the perception within labs that like it's in a vacuum and like social issues don't affect anything about science, and that whatever it is you discover isn't going to go out into the world and affect it in any way. And it's quite hard in my experiences to kind of to get scientists to think about, well, like once you like with COVID vaccines, like once this has been discovered, ideally everybody should get them, but CEOs are going to make various decisions and there's going to be pricing out of some people. So like what's your strategy for getting scientists on board with reforming patent, since it's like their invention, so they view it as their property, but at the same time they don't necessarily see how like once it gets into the world, it'll be affected by legal schemes beyond it being theirs?
No, it's a great question. And I think over the last 20 years, I've really experienced two different kinds of scientists. I think there's a lot of scientists that realize that the system we work in, the market we work in, to bring inventions to market and then get them in the hands of people, that the system isn't working. And they know that, the ones that work at, for example, drug companies, because they are constantly being called by their company lawyers to say, hey, we want to file more patents on the same product that you invented 10 years ago. Can you look at this way we've described the science this time? So they know it's being leveraged, to use a soft word. They know it's being leveraged for financial gain. And I think we've talked with a lot of scientists that want to see their inventions actually reaching people. There are scientists, as you rightly note, who also do view it as their property. But I think at the end of the day, the way our financial system works, they're not the ones receiving the benefit. The company then takes ownership of the drug, and it's not like they are continuing to benefit over the decades. So I don't think they have a skin in the game in that way. When we first started I-MAK, we actually started it with our lead scientist who had worked as head of manufacturing for a major pharmaceutical company for almost 30 years. And he was really troubled by what he saw in HIV, that the companies were saying they couldn't make it more cheaply. It couldn't reach all the countries in the global south, especially the middle income countries, like India, Brazil, South Africa, China. They were charging a much higher price for. And so he started to come in to work with us, to work with Clinton Foundation and others to really figure out on the manufacturing and process, the scientific side of how do you actually make the drug. He started to figure out how can we cut out steps to make it cheaper. And then he would work with us to say, okay, let me review the patents with you. This is complete malarkey. This is ridiculous. This is not an invention, and explaining the science to us in that way. And as I've done over the last 20 years, more and more and more public speaking, I have met more and more scientists like him who want to offer their services to us to provide scientific review of patents. And over time, we've really helped build an evidence base of how patents are just extending monopoly terms, hiking prices, and keeping medicines out of reach for people. I think what we're going to see is a sharp uptick now in the next 2 years. We're like 18 months, I think, into the pandemic, and the vaccines aren't reaching most of the world. And that was not the intention of governments providing $100 billion in taxpayer funding to develop these vaccines. It was not the intention of governments who provided so many other incentives for these companies. And we're hearing the same excuses. It's complicated. We can't manufacture this much. Companies in other countries, manufacturers don't know how to make these vaccines. Like, they don't have capacity over there in that part of the world. And I think there's a growing number of scientists that are just saying, that's hogwash. Companies all over the world have a lot of capacity and capability to produce these vaccines, and we should be working a lot faster than we are to get equity into the COVID situation.
So on the topic of current events and the pandemic, so since I-MAK has been operating since 2006, how has it changed, the field with regards to litigating patents and increasing access to these medicines? How has it changed in ways you did or didn't expect? Because no one expected the pandemic, but that may also be an opportunity to bring the conversation to the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We started doing this work before we started I-MAK on HIV. Then after we started I-MAK, we expanded from HIV to Hep C, but we also started working on pandemics like this one, like when avian flu hit in Asia. That's where we were living. And so we've seen a lot. Litigation was not always appropriate. For avian flu, it wasn't appropriate. We needed to do a lot of sort of watchdog work, and lawyers are really important for that work as well, to see how lawyers and journalists actually, to see how with avian flu, I believe it was Roche and Tamiflu, there was a lot of approvals of treatments given. There was a lot of rush to give pharma whatever they wanted to make sure that medicines were stockpiled. We paid a lot of money as the US government for that. And then it turned out that those trials were actually fudged. The British Medical Journal did a lot of investigations to show that. And so in addition to litigation, there's also just a watchdog and advocacy role that I think lawyers have played in the movement. Today, it's really different. just because it is affecting everyone. Litigation so far, we have not litigated because what the kind of work we do is patent by patent, drug by drug, or vaccine by vaccine, and we're not going to do that right now. We have focused on educating and activating the public to understand, things like the World Trade Organization's TRIPS waiver on IP. Why is that important for testing, for treatment, for ventilators, for vaccines, to bring that public pressure to ensure that the waiver gets passed and that the rules get rewritten in this moment. But I have also been doing a lot of work with 25 human rights organizations around the world who have not worked on access to medicines before. So it's a really exciting moment for us. And actually, Purvi Shah is an Ashoka fellow. Now I'm realizing, who runs Movement Law Lab. She's the one sort of coordinating that effort. And it's really amazing work because they have human rights lawyers that have been doing government accountability work, corporate accountability work, work at the level of multilateral institutions, including the UN. They have so many tools that we have not been working with historically. And we're right now in that really exciting moment of figuring out, well, what are the legal tools they're going to bring to just accelerate this fight forward. So I think that's the cool shift that's happening right now that I'm really excited about.
So in your opinion, what would a reformed patent system ideally look like? How would the balance between giving people protection over their inventions versus making their inventions accessible and affordable, where would you strike that balance?
I think the main problem with the IP system is that it's not democratized. It's not open, it's not transparent, and public participation is not a thing. We see with other agencies like with the department, education, parents, teachers, there's places for you to have a voice and really engage in a meaningful way. The Environmental Protection Agency or even the FDA, they all have ways that as a citizen you can engage and have your voice heard. And it kind of brings that much needed balance against private interests. We don't have that with the Patent and Trademark Office in the US. In all of these other countries we've worked in with our partners, it's been really amazing because they have made that balance happen. But in the United States, we don't have it. It is the USPTO views its customer as a private interest, people who are applying for patents, which is big companies, universities, pharma or tech, amongst others. And so we are really trying to shift that power dynamic. We have other prescriptions for change. We put out a 10-point equity agenda for the Biden-Harris administration because the president in, I believe it was January, put out an executive order saying all agencies have to think about advancing now racial equity and other kinds of equity in their operations. And so this recommendation is our most important one because right now, when you look at the only avenues that exist at the USPTO for public participation, they have something called a Public Advisory Committee. It's got Facebook on it, it's got Eli Lilly on it, it's got a whole bunch of law firms on it, and there is not a single affected person or constituency represented. And so we just believe that's the heart of the matter. And so we need to have public representation first, and then from there we'll be able to evolve to a more comprehensive reform agenda.
That's also interesting.
And can I make one more plug? I read this book 2 years ago called Patent Politics it's a professor at Michigan. Her name's Shobita Parthasarathi. I don't know her Twitter handle. It might be Shobita P. She has a podcast called Received Wisdom, and it talks a lot about these issues, like where does law intersect with science and technology policy? And she's able to kind of unearth and reveal how behind we are. Like Congress has, like we saw this with the big tech hearings, Congress doesn't have the capacity to evaluate emerging science and technology and to regulate it appropriately. We see that with Facebook, for example, and the vaccine misinformation. That's one example. And so, or we see that with the algorithms, when we have surveillance, why is it so racially coded? All of those things, Congress isn't really equipped at the government level to start to tackle these difficult issues. The patent system is just part of that larger picture where we're not equipped, and we're not equipped in part because lawyers, policymakers, and other people who work more on the law and policy side, we're not equipped with sort of this ethics and equity side of science and technology policy. So I have learned a lot from that resource. So I just want to mention it in case anybody's interested.
So another thing I was wondering about in regards to your journey, which I think is pretty unique, since you went from like human rights law to access to medicines and patent litigation. So what was your way of like finding mentorship? Like how did you go around get like when you switched from one area of law to another area of law, how did you connect with people who had been there and could like show you the ropes?
So when I was in law school, I don't think I understood that building relationships was like, it's the most important thing. I heard that grades were really important. So we were all hustling, for that. So we would get the public interest or law firm placement that we wanted. Nobody really explained to us upfront how important relationships are. And so when I look back on my trajectory now, I went to a firm right out of law school, realized I didn't like it. And then I called a friend of mine who was a public interest lawyer a few years ahead of me and asked her what to do. She gave me a lot of support. And then I called up the law school, and they had a Center for Human Rights and Global Justice. And they gave me a stipend to go to the World Health Organization to see if I liked that work. And once I got there, I said, I'm staying. And there were no jobs. And I found my way to India. I did human rights work like for very little pay. And over time, I like built this on my own. But everything through I-MAK that I've been able to achieve has been because of relationships. And now for the last few years, I sat on the board of NYU, that's my law school, and NYU's Law Alumni of Color Board. And I have tried to be really invested in helping law students really understand that relationships are everything for you, and not just to get a job, but when you're in your job to be effective. Now I have relationships in government, I have relationships in law firms, multilateral institutions, in the public interest legal sector. And that's what's going to enable you to be effective in whatever it is you're doing in your practice. I think it's really important. I guess you're asking how to develop those relationships. What I've been telling people since the pandemic started is I think it was different pre-COVID. I think in the pandemic, a lot of people are home, and I think they still are home. And their time has shifted. Some of us have gotten busier than ever, but also people reach out for coffee. They say, can we do a Zoom coffee? I really would love your mentorship on this. Things like that. And I think you should ask, if you ask 10 people, 2 people and I'm not talking about just somebody you think is going to take your call. Ask the dean of the law school, ask, a journalist who covers legal issues who you really admire. Ask the people that you think would never make time for your call, because I really believe during this pandemic, people will make time for stuff like that. You'll be surprised, and those relationships will serve you throughout your career.
That's all so great and so helpful. I just want to ask if any of the other participants have any questions. Yeah, Isabel.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to quickly ask you how COVID has changed your work in I-MAK. I feel like this was such an unexpected event to occur, and I've heard a lot of talk that, the likelihood of pandemics is only going to increase as we move forward because of the increase in population and global warming. And I would like to know your expertise in how your organization or other organizations that you affiliate with are preparing for that possibility, and how, like, what steps you, the major steps that you're wanting to take to prepare for that possibility.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Because it's top of mind for us right now, definitely. When the pandemic hit, actually, it's kind of funny. For those of us who work in access to medicines, we weren't that surprised because this is our work. Even HIV and hepatitis C are pandemics. We've also been at the front line of SARS, Ebola, avian flu. So this is our work. So this was just, okay, this is the next one. It's bigger. But I think we were able to roll with the punches somewhat easily because of that. We knew exactly what we had to do. Some organizations started tracking where governments were using taxpayer money to fund the contracts with pharma and to monitor them, because there's no transparency, and then get that out into the press so people understood. Like Moderna got $2.5 billion, nearly 100% funded their vaccine development, and then there were no strings attached. So from day one, we knew what to call attention to, and we knew to highlight. The first thing I started going out there and saying was that we live in I think I said that at the Ashoka event. It was the first interview I did. I said, we live in a hierarchy of health. Some people are going to get this vaccine and many are not going to get it at all. And now it's 18 months in, and that's exactly where we are. So in that sense, we were very prepared for this moment. Our work is shifting though, because we have never had a moment like this where every person who listened to us, like, we're usually the people who, we're at the dinner party and somebody says, what do you do? And we start talking and you just see that, like, the eyes glaze over. So this is the first moment we've had where every person understands, yes, we want every country to get this vaccine because it's the right thing to do. And also because of self-interest, the variants are going to keep appearing. So our job now is still, I think, to educate, but we are now trying to really move to that era of work where we're changing the rules. So part of the reason we're advocating so much for this waiver on IP is it's going to take forever. How effective is it going to be to actually get people their vaccines is going to depend on how much we pressure our governments. But what it's going to do is it's going to serve as that precedent, as that baseline for how the rules get rewritten into an international pandemic treaty, how they get rewritten into domestic law. And so we have to push really hard to get this right and to make it as expansive as possible. The other thing it's giving us the opportunity to do is to say, for example, let's take IP. The system for medicines is bigger than that. It's R&D, patents, clinical trials, supply, manufacturing, but just on the patent piece, we're able to lift that up more and say, this is actually connected to a lot of other issues. People of color in the US are dying at twice the rate of, everybody else because medicines are unaffordable. We're able to say, the biggest market that's coming in this sector right now is for psychedelics. So what is that about? That's about going to other countries, extracting plants and plant-based knowledge from indigenous communities. And the US has not signed the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Nagoya Protocol. So that means we are not agreeing to get consent from the communities and to require our companies to pay something fair in compensation. So we're able to connect the dots now on all of the issues around the system and basic fairness and try to lift them up to start to bring this agenda for reform to the fore. And that's really where we're focused.
So Erin, you had a question?
Yes, hi, thank you, Ms. Krishtel, for coming to talk to us today. I was curious when you were talking about public involvement in the process in the US, similar to, for example, what NEPA has. And that's what I'm working on this summer, is sort of NEPA opportunities for public involvement, where people can say, hey, you're considering this action and you may not know, but it impacts my community in this way because of, this particular circumstance, or, on the ground factor that, you policymakers couldn't possibly be aware of. Please take this into account. I'm curious, like what you see as the parallel in the patent process, like where the public would be, like obviously it's very important for them to be involved, as you said, but other than saying, you know, I'm very sick and can't afford this drug, but I really need it, like what is the public input that you envision?
So you're raising probably the main question I'm trying to answer this year. I don't know the answer to your question. We've done this work in other countries, like Indian activists, for example. The Delhi network of people living with HIV are really amazing. I started working with them in 2004, and they started having little to no knowledge on patents. Then I remember we did a first visit together with Doctors Without Borders to the Delhi Patent Office, and they sat down with patent examiners and shared their life experience and what was going on for them as people living with HIV, not able to get their medicines. And I saw these examiners who are really just paper pushers, you know, they are bored at their jobs. There's very technical documents they're reading, start to connect the dots. And over time, that relationship has really evolved, and it has influenced how examination is conducted, the kind of seat at the table and influence the Delhi network has in India with the patent office and engagement. And they use a number of strategies. What you're mentioning, which is like commenting on new rules, is one of the ways, but really what happens there is the network needs a lawyer to come in and support to draft that submission, which is important too. I think there's a role for public interest lawyers there, but we're trying to expand that more and more. Dana on my team explains this in a really beautiful way. What we're asking for, this is a system that by design has been structured over the last 100 years to exclude the public. In other countries, you say, okay, we want to bring members of the public community groups to the patent office. There's not really an objection. They're just like, sure, we never do that, but that's fine. And then we get meetings in Argentina. Fundación HEP has done this incredible job of like building with the patent office. And over time now they have a seat at the table. The US, the culture is the market, the free market works. IP is a key instrument in the free market, and therefore we just need the technical people to handle this, and everybody else is sort of irrelevant and actually like doesn't need to be heard. It's not, their opinion isn't really relevant for the system to work on its own. So what we're trying to figure out, and this is where Dana, I was saying, has this beautiful way of articulating this. What we're trying to shift is not that the patent office start to make it easier for community to understand the functioning of the patent office. What we want to be understood is that the perspectives of the public, whether it's farmers or breast cancer patients or people living with diabetes, their human experience and expertise in their own right needs to be integrated and valued in the system itself. And that's a culture shift, that's a systems shift. It will ultimately also have to be a law and policy or, you know, systems shift in that way. But really what we're talking about is shifting culture with this piece, because it's not, there's not a place, the system right now, the customer is the patent applicant. They invent something, they write a really technical document, they submit it, it gets approved. There's not a place in that for a patient, for example, to meaningfully intervene. So that we're looking for ideas from other offices and agencies, and we're consulting a lot of affected communities to figure out how would they recommend we design this. And so the project is called Participatory Changemaking, and it's launching next month. So hopefully I'll have more to report after that.
Thank you.
And then Annette, you have a question.
Hi, Priti. I'm actually not a law student. I'm Global Legal Director at Ashoka. So thanks for being here, and thanks, Anu, for the great questions. I had a couple of questions for you. You talked about how you've done this work in other countries. I'm really interested in which countries are models in terms of best practices. And then my other question is, and it seems like as we've been talking to fellows, this comes up a lot. Everybody talks about some of the skills that you use as a lawyer, which may not necessarily be things that are emphasized in law school. So if you were to go back to law school, or if you were to give input in terms of some of the course content that we covered in terms of how we work with clients and how we interact with people, like what what kind of course content would you suggest based on the work that you do?
So in the first question, I think there's a lot of countries that are models, and I can name some, but it's very difficult right now because so many governments have swung to the right that for civil society to get its work done has become much, much more difficult. And the systems are not operating necessarily as in the same way. But over time, I really do think the Indian model has been one to really witness, that when we started this work, the patent office said, oh, it's too hard to get documents, basic documents online. It'll take us 4 years. And then a professor at Columbia was like, no, it wouldn't. And then they hired a bunch of folks in Cambodia to do data entry, and they put up an online database, and it shifted the government. And the government didn't take that as criticism. And they said, oh, okay, we can do it faster. And now, a couple of years later, this was in 2005, they had an online database. Then we took positive people who we were working with at the time, who wanted to build a relationship with the patent office. Farmers started going to the Indian patent office, and over time they became very responsive to civil society in that way. So I found India's model at that time to be really one that was a good one to look at, to think about changes. Many other countries too, Argentina and Philippines brought in public health safeguards into their laws. Brazil has always had a health component to their patent system. They have an agency called Anvisa, and that agency also weighs in on patent reviews. So it's not just an economic matter the way it is here in the US to grant patents. Health was always centered as something to think about. Thailand and Ukraine recently brought in, evolved its standing requirement. Usually the public doesn't have standing. So affected communities don't have standing to bring patent cases. In both India and Ukraine, civil society groups have gotten that to shift to say that it's not only people with commercial interests that have a stake in this game. You have to hear us in court as well. So there's so many countries and civil society models too for how you make change. And so to your second question about what I would want to learn in law school, like we didn't have classes in strategic advocacy and activism. And I think lawyers, so many of us are activists, and I think there are tools we bring to movements. Purvi, again, see, I'm quoting another Ashoka fellow a lot. Purvi Shah's work on movement lawyering, I gave my team to read a few years ago before I even met her. Because for me, it really provided some literature and some concrete understanding around how you think about your role as a lawyer in community, how you show up, the different ways the law can serve, but also create additional barriers for communities, and how movements can engage lawyers with like right intention and the right ways of doing that. I'm saying right in the Buddhist context, by the way, not in a way to be prescriptive. And so I really think like if there were courses on movement lawyering, even for people who go to work in government or law firms, I think it's really, really useful. The other thing I think I would like to see law schools or legal curriculum bringing in now, my husband worked as a law firm partner and then a senior patent counsel in big tech for a long time. And then 6 years ago, he decided that too many of his friends in their 40s and 50s were having heart attacks, strokes, dying, not speaking up about racial and gender inequity in the workplace. And so he made a massive shift. And today he's a leadership and mindfulness coach, and he runs these big workshops for law firms and for corporations, getting people to go through kind of a internal shift of how they're seeing racial inequity being, these kind of structural things being coded in legal culture and in firm life, but he's done public defender offices. He's working across the sector. And what he's finding with lawyers is that it's not actually different for women, people of color, other groups who have been historically excluded from legal practice. Whether he's in a public interest setting or in private sector, it's the same thing of how we have to receive the culture, how we internalize that culture, the lack of spaces for us, the lack of tools. So how we shift our own journey with that and demand more from the system in ways that are effective. And then how do we shift the culture itself? And he, as a partner, has more standing to go in and kind of do that work with senior management at places. But it's the same issues whether you're in public interest law or the private sector. So I would like to see those tools being given to law students right at the outset of their journey so that they can start to not live for 15 years unhappy in the sector, but actually feel very equipped to go in and live the lives like that you all want to live.
So I have another question. So I saw that, so one of the, this is like a very particular question, but so one of the drugs that you guys work on is Sovaldi, and just for context for everybody, Sovaldi, I think it came out in 2014, but it's a complete cure for hepatitis C. And when it launched in the US, it launched at a price of $85,000 for a 12-week course. And the CEO of Gilead justified the pricing by saying it's a complete cure and it's cheaper than a liver transplant. And so I was wondering, what is your best argument against that besides like it's just morally wrong to charge that much? I'm just curious, what's your best legal argument?
On the pricing?
Yeah.
So I think, it's probably a moral argument. I just think that we're living in a culture where medicines are not public goods. And at some point that's going to shift. You know, Wall Street was saying 6 years ago when Sovaldi was launched, and there was a Wyden-Grassley congressional investigation into the pricing of that drug because Medicaid across multiple states was saying our health system is going to implode if we pay just for this drug. There goes our budget. And so I think that there's growing awareness, not just in government or from people affected by diseases, but I think Wall Street was like, at the rate the market's going, it's going to implode because nobody's going to be able to afford the medicines. So I think beyond the moral argument of, which of course is our starting point, right? That people should get the medicines they need to stay healthy and alive. It's that this is unsustainable for countries' health systems or for the planet, for drug pricing to continue in this direction. And I don't see a way out of it except for regulation. We have to make this shift. And sooner that we do it, the better, because in the last 7 years since we started working in the US, the curve looks like this on most of the drugs we work on, which is the top 10 most expensive drugs in the US, which disproportionately affect seniors. And the reason the cost is so high is because Medicare doesn't have the ability to negotiate. So that's in the US. So that's that argument. From a legal perspective, this is the system. So we use the tools we have to create equity in the market, like the patent litigation. But at the end of the day, antitrust law, for example, here in the US, or competition law in other countries, all of it has been designed to leave patents and to leave pharma just over on the side. It's very difficult to use legal tools to address drug pricing. And we've seen that now for 20, 30 years. And I think that's what COVID is bringing to the fore, is we don't want to litigate drug by drug, patent by patent, country by country. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not going to work in every case. And so how are we going to reform the system itself? That's what's next.
That's a great answer. So those are all of the questions that I have. Does anyone else have any final thoughts? Yeah, Isabel.
I just have a genuine interest in what you love most about your job. I would love to know maybe one or two of your most proud accomplishments that you've achieved so far in your career.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think, we spent a long time working with community, and as a lawyer, especially from the States, you're like, am I serving? I'm not on the ground anymore. Like, is this, there's so many power dynamics between the North and the South. So you're always just asking yourself questions to keep yourself on the right track. And then they did one of those 360 leadership audits for me. And somebody who I had worked with for a long time said, until we, or a couple of people said this, until IMACs started doing this work, the patent systems in all of our countries basically said that civil society did not have a place. And what they helped do was just come in and kind of break that glass ceiling and then say, patients and community and advocates absolutely have a seat at the table. And so I think that was probably my proudest moment in the last 20 years. The thing that is giving me life now, I've done this work now for a long time. I'm a little tired. COVID is making me more tired. I'm trying to educate. I mentioned the work with Purvi and Movement Law Lab. That's giving me a lot of life because I think we just need to activate more and more people to engage in this fight. The other thing is I work with a student organization, which I hope all of you join, called Universities Allied for Essential Medicines. So it's students across all disciplines who are in the fight for affordable medicines and vaccines. And they're doing a lot of work on COVID vaccine equity right now. I believe that my generation of activists and everybody that came before me has really tried our best to bring equity into a very broken system. We have tried litigation, we have tried policy change, we have taken a lot of incremental steps forward, and at times we have surged, but I don't think structural change is going to come from us. I really believe that when I sit with students who are thinking about, the interconnectedness of humanity, or the structural ways in which, like, let's take structural racism as an example, like how deep racialized capitalism goes. And they're actually saying consistently, no matter what country I'm speaking in, we need to burn this down. I do believe that has to happen, but it has to be with a vision for what comes next. And I think that vision has to come from people who are students right now and who are going to be the next generation of activists. So what I would love to see is more students starting to do that visioning work, especially for access to medicines, of what does that new thing that would be birthed look like?
Erin, you raised your hand and then took it down. Do you have anything? No. Okay, well, I think that's all. Thank you so much for joining us today. I learned a lot and I really appreciate your time. So.
Yeah, thank you. I know, because the questions you put together were so thoughtful. So I really appreciate how much time you put into preparing for this. And thank you all for coordinating as well.